How well do we really know the past? The truth is, not as well as we often believe. Every country and continent has gaps in its historical record, and we're always searching for pieces to complete the puzzle. Maybe some of those missing pieces are revealed in this very video. If dragons have never existed, why did the ancient Greeks build houses for them? That might seem like a facetious question, but you'll find plenty of people in Greece who believe that these odd ruins found on the south side of the Greek island of Euboea truly were made to house the mythical beasts. The megalithic houses were made without the use of any mortar, with lentils and jambs holding everything together. The sheer weight of the rocks pressed on top of each other like this ought to crush the doorway, but it doesn't. Scientists can't even work out how ancient builders managed to move the massive rocks into their current position in the first place. To compound the mystery, each dragon house is built at a high altitude and contains a circular roof opening. Presumably, that's how the dragons got in and out. The doorways must have been for their human visitors. Unusually for ancient Greece, no record of the construction of the dragon houses exists. We have no idea who built them, how they built them, or why they built them. No wonder the locals suspect that magical creatures were involved. You have to go a long way to find the Dabu giraffes. They're miles from anywhere in the country of Niger, in a part of the Sahara Desert known as the Tenara Desert. The land here is so barren that even its name translates to the place where there is nothing. There are no animals, no insects, no water, and no life. But there is a collection of 800 petroglyphs, among which the stars of the show are two gigantic carvings of giraffes. They were first identified by an explorer named Christian Dupuy in 1987, but they were carved somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago on sandstone rock. This part of the world was once under Egyptian control, but the giraffes predate Egypt itself. The arid conditions in the desert have preserved them for all this time. The size of the carvings is remarkable. One of them, believed to be a male giraffe, is 18 feet tall. That makes it the largest petroglyph in the world, and also the world's largest animal rock carving. The real puzzle of the carvings is that each of the figures is accompanied by a depiction of a human seemingly holding the giraffes on long leads. Could this mean that thousands of years ago the human race managed to domesticate giraffes? If so, why did we ever let them go? Very little is known about Italian mapmaker Urbano Monti. We know he was born in Milan, and that his parents were aristocrats. We presume that he had a very keen interest in travel and geography. If he didn't, he couldn't have come up with the enormous map that he's famous for, a map that displayed knowledge that someone from his time shouldn't have had. The colossal map, made of 60 individual sheets of paper and measuring 27 square feet when fully assembled, has the North Pole at its center, a perspective that nobody else would have used in 1587 when Monti completed his work, and very few people use even today. His idea of Japan is a little off-kilter. It's positioned east to west rather than north to south, and yet it has accurate place names and locations marked on it that no other Western map of the era featured. Monti had never been to Japan. We have no idea how he acquired that knowledge, or why he felt so able to draw the Earth as it might appear if he were hovering far above the North Pole when he was making his sketches. One of the most astonishing discoveries to happen in Egypt in recent years is that of the discovery of a whole palace belonging to Ramses the Great, believed by some to be the greatest pharaoh of them all. He ruled during the New Kingdom era, more than 3,000 years ago. The discovery was made by American archaeologists at Abydos in 2019. The team was working at the site of a funerary temple when they uncovered a stone walkway leading to a previously undetected door. Upon opening the door, they found themselves in an enormous grand structure fit for a king. It was only when they found the cartouche of Ramses II that they understood which king it was built for. The stone door had taken the archaeologists to a lobby, which eventually led to a large hall made of limestone, bricks, and tiles with columns, inscriptions of Ramses II, and a series of royal symbols etched into the walls. There are some signs that the construction of the palace began during the rule of Seti I, father and predecessor of Ramses the Great, with the son finishing his father's work. Mount Laura is both the northernmost point and the highest peak in the Fouta Djallon Highland region of northern Guinea, with a height of over 5,100 feet. That's impressively tall, but that isn't the reason Mount Laura is in our video. Pay close attention to the shape of the rock at the highest point of the peak. Plenty of people say that it looks like a woman's face. Scientists will tell you that the rock has taken on this shape because of the effects of weathering over hundreds of thousands of years. but not everybody agrees. The face has been nicknamed Dame Damali, named in honor of a small town not far from mountain. She's perfectly positioned to overlook the forested gorges beneath her, and is considered to be their guardian by those who believe that her features were carved by human hands. She's become one of the region's most important attractions for visitors, but isn't currently afforded any special protection. Without any such protection, erosion will eventually wipe her face off the mountain. One object Howard Carter discovered in the tomb was a tiny scarab brooch. It's a beautiful decorative object, but would be considered a minor detail if it weren't for the material that it's made from. The yellow scarab contains a yellowy-brown silica glass stone taken from the sand of the Sahara and then polished by a skilled craftsperson. The glass is about 28 million years old and was created when a comet hit the desert with such force that the sand was heated to a temperature of around 2,000 degrees Celsius, thus forming glass. Fragments of this ancient glass can still be found scattered across 6,000 square miles of the Sahara Desert today. The Egyptians were years ahead of their time when it came to astronomy. So is it possible that they were aware of the extraterrestrial influences that resulted in the creation of this glass? That might be a stretch, but it seems they knew there was something special about it. If they didn't, it wouldn't have become the centerpiece of jewelry made for a king. Not many people visit the Tassel Ayanager National Park. That's understandable because it's in the Algerian part of the Sahara Desert. It's a rich hunting ground for archaeologists, though, and it's also the home of the Tassel mushroom figure. Historians and scientists are as sure as they can be that the mushroom figure was created during the Neolithic era. They're also as sure as they can be that they know what it represents. They think it's a depiction of a shaman partaking in hallucinogens, specifically the type known as magic mushrooms. If they're right, this is easily the oldest evidence of humans using mushrooms as a recreational drug in the world. Prehistoric rock art was first identified in this national park in the 1910s, but further discoveries were made in the 1930s and 1960s. There are other depictions of mushroom use in rock art, but none so striking as this one. Aside from being the oldest depiction of someone using magic mushrooms, it could also be one of the oldest anthropomorphic works of rock art in the world. Here's an Egyptian pyramid you probably haven't heard much about before, even though it's older than all the rest. It's the Great Pyramid of Djoser, and it's the oldest large stone monument in the world. We believe it was built more than 4,500 years ago and was made to entomb the remains of the great pharaoh Djoser. The 200-foot-tall pyramid is made of over 11 million square feet of clay and stone, and the design work is generally credited to the legendary Egyptian polymath Imhotep. Nobody had ever built anything like this before, and had it not been built, the Egyptians would probably have never gone on to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. Once upon a time, it was surrounded by a larger walled complex containing temples and a courtyard. Secrecy was clearly important to Imhotep. There are no fewer than 13 fake doors to the pyramid's interior located around the perimeter. We may never know what truly lies inside. The Egyptian government doesn't allow anybody to enter. The Muisca people lived in Colombia before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. The brutality of the conquistadors led to the near destruction of the Muisca culture, which means we don't understand as much about it as we'd like to. However, we know enough about the Muisca calendar to admire it greatly. It's a surprisingly complex lunisolar calendar and recognizes 3 different types of years. The Muisca recognized rural years, holy years, and common years. They divided the months up into periods of 30 days, and a common year was 20 months long. To the Muisca, 20 was the perfect number because it was equal to the number of fingers and toes. Rural years, on the other hand, lasted 12 months and followed the seasons much as our years do now. The holy year was 37 months long, and historians aren't quite sure why. Records of the calendar can be found on several Muisca artifacts, including the coca stone, several ceremonial flutes, textiles, and a large astronomical site called El Infiernito. At the start of each new holy year, the Muisca performed a ceremony called the Jumping Toad. Regrettably, we have no idea what the ceremony involved. The Saqqara bird really shouldn't be such a big mystery. After all, it's just a tiny ancient Egyptian hand carving. What could be so mysterious about that? The answer is that its proportions are perfectly engineered to be capable of flight. If you threw this 2,200-year-old artifact off the top of a mountain, it'd glide perfectly with the same aerodynamic efficiency as any glider we'd be capable of making today. Although the artifact has a bird's head, the rest of it looks more like a plane than anything avian. The wings are featherless, flat, thin, and tapered. The tail is square. During the 1970s, a curious group of students scaled up the Saqqara bird to make a plane-sized replica and demonstrated that it could both fly and glide without any tailoring required. If this had been made in the past decade, we wouldn't hesitate to call it a model aircraft. But the ancient Egyptians had no aircraft to use as reference guides when making models. Might this have been a flying child's toy of some kind? Or did the person who made this understand the basic principles of flight, even if they couldn't make a powered flying machine? In 1389, a Jain businessman called Darnasha claimed to have had a divine vision while in the village of Ranakpur in Rajasthan, India. In this vision, he was told to build a temple like no other in India. Not one to disobey the will of the gods, Darnasha immediately began work on what would eventually become the Ranakpur Jain temple. Also known as the Chatamirka Dharna Vihara, he dedicated his temple to Aruna, the first Tirthankar of the Avasarpini and Jain cosmology. It's now thought of as the biggest and most important Jain culture temple and contains several smaller temples within its footprint. It took Darnasha and his team a very long time to complete their work. According to a copper-placed inscription inside the temple, it wasn't finished until 1436. Some sources say that additional construction work continued until 1496, by which time Darnasha was long dead. The most beautiful and iconic artifact within the temple is a carved idol of Parchvanatha, made from a single slab of marble and decorated with more than 1,000 snake heads. The intricacy of the work here would likely be impossible to replicate today. The stele of Ankh-F-N Kansu is an artifact that's quite a mouthful, which might be why it's known as the stele of revealing. Unusually for an ancient Egyptian stele, it's made of wood rather than stone. The artifact was discovered by Francis Augusta Ferdinand Mariette within the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut in Deir al-Bahri in 1858. The archaeologists correctly identified it as an offering stele, originally created for a Monte priest by the name of Ankh-F-N Kansu. Historians agree that it was created somewhere between the years 680 and 670 BCE. The stele might not look like it's made from wood, but that's because it's been entirely covered with a plaster gesso, then painted. The priest Ankh-F-N Kansu himself appears on the front of the artifact, depicted presenting offerings to Re Harati, the falcon-headed god. A depiction of the sky goddess, Nut, can be seen directly above him. Excerpts from chapters 2, 30, and 91 of the Book of the Dead are inscribed across the stele for unknown reasons. Also unknown is the reason that the object ended up in the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. Latin is an ancient language, but how far back in history does it go? Well, we know that it goes back at least 2,700 years, thanks to the existence of the Duenos inscription, which is one of the earliest known Old Latin texts ever discovered. It's inscribed in an unlikely place along the sides of a trio of small vases known as akernos. The vases and their puzzling inscription were found by the German archaeologist Heinrich Dressel in the valley of Quirinale close to Rome, Italy in 1880. Today, the Kernos is held in the Stadtleicht Museum in Berlin, Germany. Although it's usually possible to translate Old Latin, translating the Duenos inscription has thus far proved to be impossible. It doesn't help much that it was written without any spaces to separate individual words, nor that some of the letters can't be distinguished nor deduced by context. More than 50 different translations have been proposed since the artifact was found, most of which differ radically from each other, and none of which have gained acceptance via consensus. Research is still ongoing, so maybe we'll decipher the message one day. It's becoming increasingly common knowledge that there are secret chambers hidden in the Great Pyramid of Giza. In September 2020, explorers identified 2 secret doors hidden inside the pyramid. They're at the end of a pair of narrow tunnels that extend from the north and south walls of the Queen's Chamber inside the pyramid, and then stop at stone blocks before they reach the outer walls. There isn't enough space in the tunnels for a human to explore them, but a robot called WebWatt was sent into the space and obtained pictures of small stone door with what appeared to be 2 copper handles attached to it. The same robot took pictures of faint red hieroglyphs painted onto the walls. The hieroglyphs are rough, almost like graffiti, so it's possible that they're guide marks left behind by the stonemasons who built the pyramids. It's also possible that they're heretic numeric signs recording the length of each shaft. These shafts can't have been used for ventilation because they don't open up to the exterior of the pyramid, but they're surely too small for humans to have been expected to navigate them. Building a door implies that there's something worth protecting behind it though. What could it be? We tend to think of Tutankhamun as the boy king of ancient Egypt because of his tender age. But Tutankhamun was old enough to have children of his own. We know that because we found two of them. Sadly, they didn't live very long. The children, both of whom were girls, were buried in their father's tomb, and so were discovered when it was opened by Howard Carter in 1922. The inscriptions on their tiny coffins refer to them as the Osiris, meaning the deceased. So we don't even know their names. Somewhat inauspiciously, they're now known as mummies 317A and 317B. The mother of the girls was probably Tutankhamun's wife, and Kessenhamen, who might be the mummy currently labeled KV21A. Mummy 317A was born prematurely after only 5 or 6 months gestation, whereas 317B was born at or near full term. Their appearance is unusual. While conditions like spina bifida and Sprengel's deformity have been suggested as possible causes, neither can be confirmed. In fact, scientists have never been able to determine what the cause of death was for either child. The seated scribe, sometimes referred to as the squatting scribe, is one of the most remarkable pieces of ancient Egyptian art ever discovered. The strikingly lifelike sculpture is another discovery from Saqqara, but was found there in the avenue of sphinxes that leads to the Serapeum of Saqqara in 1850. Egyptologists have been able to date the piece to the time of either the 5th or 4th dynasties of the Old Kingdom, making it somewhere between 4,400 and 4,600 years old. As is implied by the name, the delicately painted limestone statue depicts a seated scribe at work. The eyes of the statue are the most lifelike aspect of it and are made from rock crystal and magnesite. In a curious detail, the nipples of the statue are made from wood. We don't know whether the person depicted in the sculpture is real or imagined, but the semicircular base of the piece implies that it was once fitted to a larger piece of rock, which may have included a name, a title, or both. The thin lips and broad chest of the sculpture have drawn comparisons to Pahernapfer, a high official who was alive at around the right time and is recorded in other works of art. But the resemblance isn't so striking that we can be sure it's him. Close to the village of Gantafta in Sweden is a large sandstone rock outcrop covered in carvings. They're known as the Slippriner Gantofta. For many years, it was thought that the markings were caused by nothing more remarkable than people sharpening their knives and axes on the rock, leaving behind long, deep grooves as they did so. Recently, though, experts have been reassessing the carvings, and they believe they've spotted something. They think the concave nature of these horizontal grooves might mean that they were made by a pendulum motion, similar to that of a rotating wheel. If that's the case, the markings were made with intent. Some Swedish historians believe that they might have had either magical or religious significance to the people who made them. It may also be significant that they're situated on the escarpment of the Ra River Valley. We know that the pitted where culture lived in this part of Sweden around 5,000 years ago, but we can't be certain that the grooves were carved during this period. Some people think they can see faces in the stones, but that's probably just pareidolia. There's so much to excavate and uncover at the site of Saqqara, the largest ancient necropolis in Egypt, that work at the site will probably still be ongoing long after we and everybody watching this video have passed away. Astounding discoveries are made there almost every week, including the 3,200-year-old sarcophagus of a high-ranking royal secretary, which was discovered in September 2022. The sarcophagus, which is known for its unusual red-pink shade, belongs to a man named Tamuya, who served under Ramses II and would have worked closely with the pharaoh. His full title was Royal Secretary, Chief Overseer of Cattle, head of the treasury of the Ramesseum, which was Ramses' funerary temple in another necropolis at Luxor. On top of that, Tamu-Yat was also responsible for divine offerings to all the various gods of Upper and Lower Egypt. In other words, he would have been a very busy man. Perhaps he died of exhaustion. The lid of the sarcophagus has been broken at some point in the very distant past, but it's impossible to know whether anything was stolen at the time it was broken. The Tomio Maruyama is already one of the most famous coffin burial mounds in Japan and has been for a very long time. There are several established facts about the tomb, including that it was created during the late 4th century. It's the largest of all the coffin burial mounds in Japan, which explains why it's taken archaeologists such a long time to fully excavate it. When they finally did, so in January 2023, they came across something strange. A person buried at the very center of the tomb with an enormous bronze mirror and a 7-foot-long iron sword placed across their chest. Even the coffin that the deceased is buried in is unusually large, measuring just over 16 feet from top to bottom. Large mirrors have often been found inside the tombs of the elite in China, but this is the first time that such a discovery has happened in Japan. The artifact is shield-shaped and covered in interweaving patterns. Experts say the patterns are identical to a Kofun period mirror known as the Daryukyo, and so they've named it the Daryaman shield-shaped bronze mirror. It's not the most imaginative title, but at least it's accurate. You'd need a degree in Egyptian history before you could even begin to contemplate the full extent of the mysteries of the Temple of Kamambo. Even that probably wouldn't be enough. However, the mummified remains of several hundred crocodiles were recently found underneath the temple, thus finally explaining some of the markings on the walls. Unusually for Ptolemaic period Egypt, the temple is divided into two. We have 2 halls, 2 courts, 2 sanctuaries, and even 2 entrances. Half of the temple is devoted to worshipping Sobuk, the other half to Horus. The Sobuk half of the temple is covered in crocodile paintings, but nobody could ever work out why. The paintings earned the temple the nickname House of the Crocodiles, but until the crocodile remains were found, most historians just thought of the artwork as quirky and unexplained. What remains unexplained are the engravings of medical and surgical implements on the temple walls, which are said to be the oldest in the world. Were there 2 separate priesthoods here? Was one devoted to medicine and the other to crocodiles? If so, what do they have in common? Many an ancient sarcophagus has been discovered in Ukraine over the years, but none quite so special as the sarcophagus of Prince Yaroslav the Wise. Part of the reason why he's known as the Wise is that he founded the first ever library in Ukraine inside St. Sophia's Cathedral in Kiev, which is where he's now interred. The cathedral itself was built during his reign during the 12th century, and the sarcophagus has been there ever since. But his body is no longer there. It's believed that it was stolen during the Second World War, although nobody knows who stole it, why they stole it, or what happened to it afterwards. The sarcophagus is one of the few things inside the cathedral that's never been damaged or replaced, as it was attacked and damaged several times in the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries. By the 17th century, it needed to almost be completely reconstructed, with work beginning in the 1600s and continuing into the 1700s. The sarcophagus remained intact and untouched throughout the work. Today, the cathedral no longer functions as a church and is instead a museum of the religious history of Ukraine. Howard Carter's team obtained many fine items from the tomb of Tutankhamun when they opened it in 1922, including King Tut's death mask, which makes the one we just looked at look like an amateur effort. Some of those artifacts are more famous than others, though, and one of them you might not have heard about before is the lotus chalice, which is also sometimes known as the wishing cup. Experts believe that it was created during the king's reign, or that it may have been made specifically to be buried with him, in which case it was made somewhere between 1332 and 1323 BCE. Impressively, the entire chalice is carved from a single piece of alabaster. Several inscriptions are engraved into its surface, including a dedication to the memory of Tutankhamun, which reads, "May you live, may you spend millions of years, you who love Thebes, sitting with your face to the north wind, with your eyes beholding happiness." The same inscription was carved into the gravestone of Howard Carter himself when he passed away. The one-of-a-kind chalice is now on display inside the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. If you thought that the hand grenade was an invention of the First or Second World War, we have news for you. To discover the origin of the hand grenade, you have to go back a lot further than the 20th century. Try the 7th century instead, which is when Greek fire was used on the enemies of the Byzantine Empire. This ancient hand grenade isn't from the 7th century, it's from the 14th, but we've chosen it because it looks so much like the devices that are used in modern times. The clay grenade is acorn-shaped and even has a hole at the top for a fuse to be inserted. It would have been filled to the top with a flammable liquid and then hurled at enemy ships to cause as much damage as possible. This particular example was found off the coast of Israel in 2016 and is thought to be a leftover from the Crusades. The flammable liquid inside it was probably alcohol, so it wouldn't have been as destructive as the grenades of today, but would still pose a huge risk to a wooden boat. If you want to find a fine ancient Egyptian artifact, the best place to look is a museum. As an example, here's the funerary mask of Hatnefer, which is on display at the Met Museum in New York, USA. The distinctive mask was discovered by the museum's own Egyptian expedition team in 1936 inside a rock-cut tomb on a hillside close to the offering chapel of Sinanma in Thebes. Rather than being a pharaoh or a queen, Hatnefer was the mother of Sinanmut. History records that she was in her 70s by the time she passed away. Sinemut was not yet the king, but he was a rich official who had the resources to provide a rich burial for his mother, including a gilded mummy mask, a heart scarab, and a canopic box. The remains of her husband, Ramos, were exhumed and then reburied with her at the time of her entombment. The mask is made from cartonnage, which is similar to paper mache, but it's been overlaid with gesso and linen and then topped with gold foil to make it look more ostentatious. As a finishing touch, the eyes are made of Egyptian alabaster and obsidian. The artifact is more than 2,450 years old. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.